Wyoming Territory, July 1878. The door slammed behind her so hard it rattled the warped frame, but the sound still was not louder than her uncle's voice shouting. "You are no longer my concern, Phoebe. Find somewhere else to rot." Phoebe Kessler stumbled down the warped steps of the cabin, her satchel half-packed, her dress dusty and wrinkled, her heart thudding like hooves across dry earth. The air smelled of pine and old smoke, and the sun was just beginning to dip behind the tall ridges that framed the land. She tightened her grip on the bag and pressed her lips together, willing herself not to cry. She had no money, no horse, no kin. Just a bruised cheek from yesterday's backhand and a stomach that had not seen more than stale beans in 2 days. Her boots, too tight from the years of growth since she last had a new pair, pinched with every step. She walked until the cabin disappeared behind the trees, until the road turned into dust and her legs ached from the uneven ground. The sky was dimming fast, and she had no destination, just the weight of her uncle's cruelty trailing her like smoke. Then hoofbeats. She froze, heart in her throat. The rider came into view slow, not rushing, just steady like he had all the time in the world. A tall man on a chestnut mare, his hat pulled low, a rifle tied behind his saddle, and a second horse trailing behind, riderless and tethered. He slowed when he saw her, brows shadowed beneath the brim. "You all right, miss?" he asked, voice calm but clear. She hesitated. Then, because there was no good reason to lie. "No." He dismounted. Took his time, like he did not want to scare her. He wore worn boots and a trail coat caked with dust, but his eyes were sharp and careful, not unkind. "What happened?" "My uncle threw me out." Her voice cracked. "Said I was a burden." The man looked her over, not leering, just taking in the bruises, the dirt, the bag she carried like it was all she had in the world. "I'm Colter O'Malley," he said. "I got a camp not far from here. Just coffee and a fire, but you're welcome to rest there. Safe place, I promise." Phoebe hesitated. Her uncle always warned her about wandering men. But Colter didn't reach for her, didn't push. Just waited, reins in hand, quiet and patient. She nodded. He helped her onto the second horse. His hands never lingered. Then they rode under the darkening sky, the silence between them easier than she expected. The camp was a clearing near a stream, with a tarp strung between trees and a fire already burning low. He handed her a tin cup of hot coffee and some jerky, then sat opposite her, letting the fire crackle between them. "You got anywhere to go?" he asked. She shook her head. "No one else left." He nodded like he understood. "You can stay here a few nights, till you figure something out." She looked across the fire at him. "Why are you helping me?" He tossed a stick into the flames. "Because I was alone once too. Ain't something I'd wish on anyone." They did not say much else that night. Phoebe lay down on a spare bedroll, the stars thick above her. She listened to the quiet sounds of the Wyoming wilds and Colter's slow breaths across the camp, and for the first time in weeks, she did not feel afraid. The next morning, he had coffee ready before she even sat up. She winced as she stood, her ribs sore. "You hurt bad?" he asked, eyes narrowing. She nodded. "Just bruises. He never broke anything." Colter looked away and muttered something under his breath. Then he said, "I'm heading to Fort Bridger in a few days. Got work there. You want to come? I could use help packing and such." Her chest tightened. "You sure?" "I would not offer if I was not." So she stayed? Helped him gather supplies, cleaned up camp, even mended a torn saddlebag. He showed her how to set traps, how to move quiet through the woods. They talked more small things. He told her he grew up in Missouri, left when his brother died in the war. She told him about her mother, who passed when she was 12, and how her uncle only took her in because he got paid to. On the third morning, she woke to him crouched by the fire with a rabbit roasting and 2 cups of coffee set in the dirt. "Morning," he said, almost smiling. Phoebe sat beside him, took the cup. Their fingers brushed, and something fluttered in her chest. Later, When they rode toward Fort Bridger, the horses side by side, he looked over and said, "You ride well." She grinned. "I rode every day before my uncle sold the horse." He nodded. "Maybe we get you another one, once we reach town." Her brows rose. "You do not need to do that." "I know," he said, voice quiet. "Still want to." They reached Fort Bridger by evening. It was a small place, mostly trading posts and soldiers passing through. He had a friend who let them stay in a spare room above the shop. Phoebe had a bed, a door with a lock, and clean water. It felt like luxury. That night, Phoebe stood by the window, watching the quiet street. Colter stepped beside her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Just. Never thought I would be here. Safe. With someone kind." He looked at her then, really looked. "You deserve more than just safety, Phoebe." Her breath caught. "What do I deserve?" His hand brushed hers. "Peace. A home. Someone who sees you." She turned to him. "Do you see me, Colter?" "I do." She leaned forward, and he did not pull away. Their foreheads touched, and for a moment the world was just quiet and warm and still. She whispered, "Thank you for finding me." He answered, "Thank you for letting me." The room above the trading post held a quiet stillness come morning, the kind that settled in before the world stirred. Phoebe sat on the edge of her cot, combing her fingers through her hair, still tangled from sleep. The floorboards creaked behind her, and she turned slightly as Colter stepped inside. He carried a wrapped parcel in one hand and looked down at it as though unsure what to say. "I traded the old saddlebag for this," he said. "Thought you might need it." She reached for the bundle and unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a soft cotton blouse and a skirt, both plain but sturdy, and not patched through with someone else's history. Her hands stilled on the fabric. "I've never had something new of my own," she said, voice low. "Well," he said, stepping back toward the door. "Now you do." She didn't answer, only stared down at the gift, her throat tight. Later that day, after she changed into the new clothing, they walked together along the edge of the post. Wagons rattled through the loose dirt track, and soldiers passed in pairs, boots thudding in practiced rhythm. Phoebe's eyes moved from the bustle to the distant foothills where the land rolled in quiet browns and greens. "I don't want to stay here," she said suddenly. "Not in town." He looked at her, then followed her gaze. "You got something else in mind?" "I want to live where I can breathe," she said. "Grow things. Be useful." He nodded once. "There's land west of here. Homesteads going up. I know a place not far from the Green River. Soil's decent. Water's clean." She turned to him. "Would they let me claim land? A woman?" "Not alone," he said. "But I could file." She studied him, searching the set of his jaw, the steadiness in the way he met her gaze. "You'd do that?" "I would," he said. "But only if it's what you want." Phoebe folded her arms across her chest, wind tugging at her sleeves. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you don't scare easy. I know you're not looking to be saved. And I know you don't lie." The words settled between them like roots taking hold. She nodded. "If we build it together, then yes. I want that." That evening they sat on the porch of the post, watching a thundercloud roll in over the ridge. The air carried the scent of rain and something else, wood smoke, maybe, or the memory of green things after drought. He passed her a piece of paper, his handwriting uneven but clear. It was a list: flour, seed sacks, nails, canvas, soil. "We'll need more than this," she said, reading through it. "We will," he agreed. "But it's a start." Phoebe folded the paper and tucked it into her skirt pocket. "I can sew. And I remember how my mama kept a kitchen garden. We had squash, beans, even rhubarb." He leaned back against the post. "I don't know much about growing things. But I can build a wall straight and keep wolves off the door." The thunder cracked in the distance, low and rolling. She didn't flinch. Instead, she turned toward him, studying the lines at the corners of his mouth, the scar just beneath his ear, half hidden by his collar. "What happened to you?" she asked. He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, "I stayed too long in a place I should have left. Paid for it." Phoebe nodded slowly. "I understand that." He looked at her then, and there was something softer in his gaze. "I know you do." They rose before dawn the next day, packed their things, left the post behind. They bought a canvas tent with the last of Colter's coin and loaded it onto a borrowed cart, pulled by a mule with a stubborn streak and a taste for thistles. The road west was rutted and narrow, winding through stands of cottonwood and rolling open meadows. They spoke little, the rhythm of travel filling the silence. But every now and then, he'd point out a landmark, a rock shaped like a horned toad, a bend in the river where elk came down to drink. When they reached the spot he'd spoken of, she knew it before he said a word. The land opened wide and flat beneath a ridge of red stone. A creek ran clear across the edge, lined with willows that danced in the wind. The grass was thick and high, bending with the breeze like it had been waiting for someone to tend it. He stopped the cart and turned to her. "Well?" She stepped down, walked a few paces into the field, then turned back to him. "This is it." He nodded once. "Then let's get to work." They pitched the tent, drove stakes into soil that gave easily beneath the weight of their hopes. She spread out their blankets, while he dug a fire pit and stacked stones around it. That night, they sat beside the flame, shoulders brushing, the sky above them vast and full of stars. Phoebe leaned against his arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think we can make it work?" "I do," he said. "Because we'll do it together." She didn't answer, only laid her head against him and watched the fire burn low. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. The days took on a rhythm that neither of them named but both settled into. Colter split logs and dug post holes beneath a sun that baked the earth hard by noon and softened it again by dusk. Phoebe hauled water, took to the soil with a borrowed hoe, and marked out rows with string and stakes. They didn't speak much while working. They didn't need to. The sound of tools and breath and birds nesting in the willows filled the silence well enough. One morning, after a night of dry wind that left dust gathered in the folds of the canvas tent, Colter straightened from hammering a beam into place and asked, "You ever see a barn raised?" Phoebe brushed her hands on her skirt, squinting up at the frame. "No, but I can learn." He studied her face for a moment, then said, "You'll do more than that." By dusk, the walls stood waist high. He taught her how to read the grain of the wood before the saw touched it. She showed him how to braid a length of hemp rope so it wouldn't fray under weight. She didn't say where she learned that, and he didn't ask. That night, thunder rolled over the ridge, but the rain never came. They sat just inside the tent, boots off, shoulders brushing as the lantern flickered low. Phoebe watched the flame lean and asked, "Do you miss Missouri?" Colter leaned back on one elbow. "Not the place, no." She turned toward him, her voice quiet. "But someone in it." He nodded once. "My brother Elias." Phoebe waited. The silence stretched, but she didn't fill it. "He was younger," Colter said finally. "Always had his nose in a book. Thought he'd be a preacher. War took that from him." Phoebe folded her hands in her lap. "My mother used to tell me some grief sits in your bones. Doesn't go away, just learns how to live there." He looked at her, something unreadable crossing his face. "She sounds like someone worth knowing." She was. Neither of them moved for a long while. The lantern's flame caught a ridge in the glass and sent a slip of gold along his jaw. Phoebe didn't look away. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what's next after the walls go up." She tilted her head. "You mean after the house is built?" "I mean after we've made a life out of this place." Phoebe's hands went still. "I want us to file the land together," he continued. "Not just my name. You'd do that? I want to build something that's ours. Not mine with you in it." Her voice was steady, but her fingers curled slightly against the canvas floor. Nobody's ever given me part of anything. Only taken. Well, he said, I'm not them. She looked at him for a long time, then nodded. All right. We'll file together. The next morning, they rode into Bridger again. The air was dusty and hot, and the sky held that glazed look it got when storms waited behind the mountains. Phoebe walked beside Colter into the land office, her chin high. Inside, the clerk barely looked up. Name? Colter glanced to her, then back. Colter O'Malley and Phoebe Kessler. That made the clerk pause. You married? No, Colter said, steady. The man frowned. Can't file jointly otherwise. Phoebe's heart thudded once, hard. Colter's voice didn't waver. Then we'll fix that. They stepped back outside. The wind kicked up grit along the street. Phoebe stared ahead, lips parted. You mean to marry me? She asked. I do. She turned to look at him. You never asked? He met her gaze. I figured you'd want to decide, not be persuaded. A long breath passed between them. Then she said, Ask me now. He took her hands, calloused and rough against hers. Phoebe Kessler, will you marry me? She didn't smile, didn't cry, just held his hands tighter. Yes. They found the circuit preacher just past the livery. He was a thin man with a bent back and a voice like dry paper. The ceremony was short. A few words, a single ring Colter had traded for in town. Phoebe said her vows without tremble. Colter answered without pause. Afterward they walked back through the post side by side. The sky had darkened to the west, and the smell of rain was finally real. She looked down at the ring on her finger. You never said why you wanted to marry me. He kept his eyes ahead, voice quiet. You never asked? I'm asking now. He stopped walking. Because every morning you wake before the sun. Because you work beside me like the lands always belong to you. Because you don't flinch when I talk about loss. And because when I look at you, I don't feel alone anymore. Phoebe looked at him, and her eyes didn't waver. I don't either. The rain came as they reached the edge of town, slow and steady. They rode back through it, damp but not cold, the land softening beneath them. And when they reached the homestead, Phoebe stepped down from the mule, turned to Colter and said, Let's finish what we started. He nodded, and together they walked toward the frame of the home they were building side by side, as they always would. The last of the roof beams went up before the first frost. Colter stood on the ladder, shoulders tense beneath his shirt, the weight of the timber braced across his back. Phoebe steadied the frame from below, her palms pressed flat to the grain. Neither spoke until the beam was seated and nailed, the echo of the hammer sharp against the chill air. Colter climbed down, his breath coming hard, and leaned against the half-finished wall. You ever think about the kind of stove you want? He asked, rubbing the back of his neck. Phoebe brushed sawdust from her sleeves. I want one with a flat top. Big enough for a griddle and a kettle at the same time. Cast iron? He asked. She nodded. If we can find one that's not cracked through. He looked toward the wagon, where their supplies were stacked beneath a canvas tarp. We'll take the mule down to Evanston next week. Ask around? The wind shifted, carrying the scent of cold earth and pine. Phoebe pulled her shawl tighter and walked to where the creek curved around the edge of their claim. She crouched by the bank, brushing her fingers through the icy water, and listened to the reeds whisper. Colter joined her after a while, crouching beside her but not reaching out. You thinking about the planting? He asked. No, she said. I'm thinking about how quiet it is. Like the land's waiting. He glanced at her, then out across the meadow. It's always waiting. Just needs someone to listen. She turned to him. You always talk like that? He shrugged. I spent a lot of years not saying anything. She stood, brushing grit from her skirts. You could have kept writing the day you saw me. Why didn't you? Colter rose slowly, boots sinking a little into the soft dirt. You looked like you'd been thrown away. I don't believe in leaving folks where they've been thrown. Phoebe didn't answer right away. Then, you ever wish you'd done it different? Left the trail sooner, found a place earlier? He shook his head. I wouldn't have found this. I wouldn't have found you. Later, when the light faded and the sky burned orange behind the hills, she brought out the ledger they'd traded for in town. Inside were blank pages, neat lines. She sat cross-legged on the floor of the half-built house, the open book in her lap. I want to keep a record, she said, of what we built, where we started. Colter sat beside her, stretching out his legs. You want to write it all down? Not everything. Just the pieces that matter. He watched her dip the pen and scratch out the first words. Her handwriting was small but steady. You ever think about what we'll do once it's all finished? He asked. She didn't look up. I think about the mornings. Waking up with walls around us. Warm bread. A door we open for each other. Colter nodded slowly. Not just surviving then. No, she said, setting the pen aside. Living. They were quiet a long while after that. The lantern cast long shadows across the floorboards, and outside, the wind hummed low through the willows. Near midnight, Colter stirred, his voice low. I've got a sister. Haven't seen her in near 12 years. Phoebe looked over. Where is she? Back east. Married now, I think. Last letter came right after the war. I never answered it. Why not? He rested his hands on his knees. Didn't feel like I had anything left to offer her. I was angry. Lost. Phoebe's voice softened. You think of writing her now? Maybe, he said. If I can tell her I've built something worth knowing. Phoebe reached for his hand. He let her take it. You have, she said. You will. The fire burned low, and neither moved to tend it. They sat close, her head resting lightly against his shoulder, until the last of the flame gave out and the only warmth left was between them. The first snow came in early November, soft and slow, blanketing the still open roof beams and turning the unfinished porch into a hush of white. Phoebe stood at the edge of the barn frame, watching the flakes settle on her sleeves. She wore a wool coat several sizes too big, one Colter had found in a crate of trade goods and insisted she take. It smelled faintly of pine pitch and tobacco, but it kept the wind out. Inside the house, Colter worked with a quiet determination, his saw rasping through the final planks for the loft. Phoebe stepped in from the cold, closing the door gently behind her. I saw a lynx trail by the creek, she said, brushing her gloves against her thighs. Barely missed the chicken run. Colter looked up, his brow furrowed. We'll fence it better come thaw. Can't lose the hens. We won't, she said, pulling off her gloves. I've been thinking we should build a smokehouse come spring. Cure what we can. It'll last longer. Colter set down the saw. You already planning next year? Phoebe nodded. I want to make use of every inch we've got. I want this place to carry us through more than one season. He stepped over to her, resting a hand against the frame of the door. I was thinking we might plant apple trees. They won't give fruit for years, but it's something to wait for. She smiled, slow and sure. Then let's plant them. The house took shape around them. Floorboards sanded smooth, window shutters carved and hung, a stone hearth built from river rock they hauled themselves. In the evenings, they sat beside the fire with their boots off and their legs stretched out, her head tucked beneath his chin. They learned the way the other moved without needing to speak. He always left the last bite of cornbread on the plate for her. She always kept the lamp filled and lit before dusk without being asked. On the coldest days, Colter would step outside before dawn and return with a rabbit or a brace of grouse. Phoebe made stew that simmered all day, and the smell soaked into the walls until even the bare wood felt warm. They traded with a neighbor 2 miles east for flour and sugar, an older widow named Mrs. Drumlin, who kept goats, and had a sharp tongue for anyone who didn't mind their manners. Phoebe's bread earned them a few extra pounds of beans, and Colter fixed the axle on her wagon in trade. One quiet morning, Phoebe was crouched in the garden bed beside the house, turning the soil with a hand spade, when Colter came up behind her and knelt without a word. He helped loosen the earth, his fingers working beside hers. You ever think about children? She asked, not looking up. He paused, brushing the dirt from his thumb. I do. Her hands stilled. Would you want them here? With you? Yes. She sat back on her heels, eyes on the sky. I used to think I'd never have a place safe enough. You do now, he said. And you've made it so. That night, they lay beneath the heavy quilts Phoebe had sewn from worn shirts and old flour sacks, the fire casting soft light across the rafters. Colter reached for her hand beneath the covers. When I met you, he said, you looked like you'd run out of road. She turned her face toward him. And you looked like you'd stopped believing there was anything left to find. He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then the corner of her lips. I was wrong. So was I, she whispered, and pulled him closer. By the time winter broke, their home stood solid and whole, with smoke curling from the chimney and dried herbs hanging from the kitchen rafters. The garden rows were marked, the barn door hung on new hinges, and a cradle Colter had spent weeks carving sat in the corner of the bedroom, waiting. In early June, with the meadow in bloom and the creek running fast with melted snow, Phoebe gave birth to a daughter. She named her Clara, after her mother. Colter held her in the crook of one arm, his other hand wrapped around Phoebe's as she lay back against the pillows. She's got your eyes, he said. And your chin, Phoebe whispered, her voice hoarse but full. They stayed like that for a long while. No words, just the sound of the baby breathing and the wind brushing through the open window. The weeks that followed were quiet and full. Colter rocked Clara by the fire while Phoebe stirred porridge. Phoebe sang soft lullabies while Colter mended the fence. Their days were ordinary in the best way, full of purpose and care, each one building on the last. By autumn, Clara sat up by herself, her cheeks round and rosy. Phoebe carried her out to the orchard where the first tiny apples had begun to bud. She held her daughter close and whispered, You were born into something good. Colter came up beside them, wrapping one arm around Phoebe's waist. She'll grow up knowing she's wanted. Phoebe looked up at him. She already does. They stood there as the wind rustled through the young trees, the land quiet and whole around them. And when evening came, they walked back to the house they built with their own hands, the sun dipping low behind the ridge, their daughter warm against Phoebe's chest and Colter's hand resting steady at the small of her back. They didn't speak of the past anymore. They didn't need to. Everything they needed was right there beneath their feet, in each other's arms, and in the soft heartbeat of the child they'd made between them. And they never left. Not for the rest of their long, good lives.